We watched Newsreel 1 and 2, Concrete Heartland, and then Andrea made Estate of Reverie. I got that bit right. Thank you so much. It's like I've seen the second time I've seen it, it's an incredibly generous and complicated thing to try and unpack in such a short space of time, especially with all these questions. And I was trying to think of a way of trying to bring this conversation together in a way. And something that struck me about all four films we watched, although John Smith isn't here, is that everyone who made the films actually lived in the place that they were made and was involved in the community in some way where the films were made. And I wondered if we could talk first maybe about the way in which being an insider, if you like, maybe affords you a sort of access and enables a shared language or an intuitive way of working with the people you work with, and also how that then might translate into the type of film you end up making and the way it looks and the way it feels. I think about that with your film quite a lot, and how you might have negotiated those relationships, then the film you ended up making, if you maybe wanted to start.
Is that okay? Yeah. So I never intended to make a film on the estate at all, because I was very active in the residence committee anyway since I've moved there. So for 15 years, before the decision was made that the estate is going to be finally demolished, we kind of tried to press the council to get it fixed up and repaired, because it was in really bad disrepair, but there were very strong, solid buildings, and it wasn't found that people who lived in it. So, and only when I knew for sure it was going to be demolished, something happened. It was like, what is it actually that we are experiencing? Like, what is it that we are no longer, what will there no longer be? And it's almost untangible. Because, on the one hand, you can say, okay, there are these procedures, this is what's happening. But actually, a sense of feeling, like because of my background, I never had a kind of permanent home, even as a child. Like I never lived anywhere for as long as I lived on the Haggerston Estate, and I don't really have a family. So my friendships with everybody, and not just mine, but people's kind of friendships with each other were very intense. But that didn't mean necessarily people were in each other's homes. They would meet outside. So the kind of way in which the architecture was, it was a Neo-Georgian flatted dwellings, they're called, but they are open access red brick estates. So you can meet in the courtyard. There usually was a playground in the middle, or where people would gather, and you can overlook it. So people would meet out in these kind of semi-public spaces. And I became very interested in this kind of thing. What is this relationship between people? What is it that I'm going to lose? Who are these people that I live amongst, who have become my friends, who I feel very comfortable with? And I wanted to really show, so it started out very loose for many years until I kind of understood what was the kind of film that I wanted to make. I didn't know in the beginning at all. So it came kind of a self-interest. I didn't even know if I was going to make a film. It could have been,
Yeah, I just wonder about that process of then deciding to make a film, because that's what you do, right? You make films, so you're like, well, is that how it worked? You're like, well, I make films normally, so I'll make a film about this. Or what was it about filmmaking particularly that you thought lent itself to tell this story, or to tell their stories, or to tell this really complicated set of situations going on? What was it about, I guess, filmmaking?
Originally, I think it was more like bearing witness to a community that was no longer going to be there in this configuration, and it was a way of giving attention. And I'm really inspired by John Berger, and there's a beautiful essay where he mentions Simone Weil and her essay on attention, on how we look. If you really look properly, we see things that we don't see when we just rush through something. I'm very interested in this kind of idea of looking in a world that is so fast, where one thing is being declared or proclaimed, but actually something quite different is what we see. So, for example, in the archive clip, they say it's a really grubby estate with filthy kids, but it's very clean and the kids look very good. Everybody's dressed up. So it's this kind of propaganda making of mainstream media. That was a BBC archive film, by the way. So I'm very interested in this disjuncture of what we're supposed to believe and what actually is there if you just look long enough. So naturally, for me, the camera is a way of a memory. It's a memory in the first instance of looking at something that I might process at a later stage. And because I had the time, because I lived there, so I didn't have to, apply for funding or whatever, so I could just more or less do it for many years.
And I guess that ties into what you guys were doing. I mean, in a way, how much was it a sense of bearing witness, and how much was it a sense of trying to find a way to engage or become more to draw a more active engagement through the act of filmmaking? I think, how did you sort of balance those two things?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think in one sense, I mean, you mentioned Simone Weil, and she was someone she was yearning for community her whole life, in a sense, and she fought for many communities, from the Renault factory to the Spanish Civil War. And I don't think there is such a thing as community. I think there's a moment where we come together and we fight. Community is the thing that we fight for, right?
Mm.
Yeah, it's an expression of a need in some way.
And we have so I think maybe a red thread running through these films is that these are communities of struggle and that they come together as as communities of struggle. So in that sense, I think our film really was embedded in that, and it's just one take on all the battles that were taking place.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happened in the process of our film is that we had to kind of do a certain amount of kind of excavation to find out what had happened to the community, because at the time that we were making it, in the language of regeneration, the tenants had already been decanted. They'd already been moved off elsewhere. So the only residents of the estate were leaseholders, and it was a different type of community to what you might think of as a residential community. There was another kind of activity going on, which was just as much a community, but a part of a struggle. So in terms of our approach to what we found, so a lot of the material in our film is actually archival, in the sense that we unearthed quite a lot of sound material and also recorded material at recorded sound at council meetings and so on. So we were kind of, I suppose, almost reinventing what it might have been like to be a community after the fact, in a sense.
And I think that's something that's common about, you say, like, this idea of struggle, but there's also a sense that through the making of these films, there was a community developed around the filmmaking itself, right? I think, Richard, you said even with the ones you were making, there was a sense that by introducing the idea of making a film, it brought people together. It created a sense that there was a creative focus, if you like, and I think quite a familiar focus in some ways too.
Yeah, well, I was running a cinema, as well as living on the road. I was also running a cinema on the road, and so there was already a community centre which enabled me to call a public meeting. So that was attended, I suppose, by about 300 people or something like that, and that then just laid the debate open. Is there a value in making a film? Who's interested? Let's take this forwards. And so a group was established with a view to making something that had that was going to have a campaigning purpose. The first instance was not going to be able to make that film because there was no funds available, and the situation was unfolding very rapidly. So we needed to get underway. And so the group was established, and we started shooting pretty much straight away. First of all, setting out what we thought the arguments were, and then once the fourth public inquiry was announced, then to use that actually in the second newsreel to make that a campaigning film.
How much would you see your films as campaign films, and how much would you see them as community films, or how would you negotiate those kind of ideas around activism as a form to solve a problem or to affect change in terms of policy, and how much do you see them much more as the filmmaking in itself as a form of activism, if that makes sense as a question?
Do you want to answer first?
Oh.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the newsreels were certainly intended entirely to be activist, and they were intended to be provide information and the arguments from people that were really well informed. You have to remember, of course, that a public inquiry is going to bombard a small number of people, because the vast majority will not attend. So how do you engage people, to get into the public inquiry, to be sufficiently motivated, and then to be armed with some of the arguments, which are actually very complicated. So we've obviously got political speakers, but we've also got academics and so on who really did understand some of the kind of key arguments. And the film that we went on to make subsequently went into a much, much broader argument, because we also made films around the building of the city airport and all sorts of other stuff as well. And so we were really looking, as we began looking very locally, because the whole point was, what the hell's happening on my doorstep? I don't understand it. But then as you begin to unpack it, you realise actually you can't look at your doorstep. Then you've got to look at local transport policy, then national transport policy, and then how all the different areas of transport relate to how people actually live. And so it was then trying to make a structure subsequently in a feature-length film which covered a much broader range of subjects. But in the meantime, we needed to stop this motorway getting built, and this was the first instance that ever happened in Britain.
How would you, you're nodding along, how would you relate to that experience?
Well, I guess, I mean, it kind of Concrete Heartland has turned into a campaigning film. We never wanted it to be one. It was never meant to be one. It was meant to work alongside everything, the various campaigns that are already in existence. And I guess the only aspect in which it does something different from them is that for the first time it puts the public inquiry material in the public domain, of which we had about 60 hours. So putting that out was a key element to what we were doing. But I mean, this is like the 25th, I think, screening that we're doing in the past year and a half, and people have certainly taken it up as a campaigning film, and there's usually a really good discussion afterwards. Yeah. But I think I struggle with it because I find it a very, I find it hard to find something positive in it. Maybe because we've been living in it for so long.
Yes, I mean it obviously, yes, I mean it traces obviously a very grim situation. But yeah, I mean, as Rastko says, it has found itself to be an activist film, and it's played, I think, quite an important role in when it's been screened, and it's mostly been screened within sort of local community groups and places with people who are familiar with what happened to the Haggerston Estate and in many cases are facing similar struggles themselves. So it then becomes a catalyst for more conversation and more further activism around what can be done about this situation. So so it has become that, and I would say we're quite happy with its role as that, because I mean it's a good role for it to have. That is positive in itself.
Definitely, and I think that how does that how does that relate to how you see your film?
I made a really conscious decision I also filmed the whole procedure, the hearings. I could have made a very expository film, and at some point when one of my neighbors died, I mean, quite a few people in the film who had passed away now, and he died and he wasn't found for many weeks, even though it's because he used to often go away and then and I just thought, so there are these people who live alone, this estate was seen as a problem estate, so a lot of people were just thrown in there to kind of survive. And I thought, I'm really, I guess my kind of activism, if you want to see it in that way, is looking really at the relationship, is looking at political and structural violence and people, how we survive within them. But in order to do that, therefore, I have to show human beings, right? I want to show the cost of these structures on the lives of people and the resilience of the people also within these structures, but the human beings at the heart of this. So I wanted to, instead of saying, oh yeah, he's a former prisoner, oh yeah, he's a recovering, or he's this, he's that, I wanted to just show the beauty of these lives, right? When how they're funny, they're absolutely not victims, yet they're seen as, okay, we need to give charity, we need to do this, we need to, actually people just need a little bit more in order to look after themselves, and they need to have a decent house. So for me, I guess it's really challenging the way in which the media, and I think the main thing, I think personally, why we're in this pickle, and because media is relatively young, right? But after the last big crisis, financial crisis, everywhere across London, particularly in East London, you had posters in all the bus shelters saying benefit cheats, we're going to get you, we're going to do this. So it kind of started to demonize the poor people, not the people who were actually dealing with the money. And I thought this is so interesting, like how is the feeling shifted, and then the last big question about the support of the welfare state of young people, it's the first time that the majority of young people are no longer supporting the welfare state. And it's a really scary idea after, we've only just recently had the Second World War, plus all the other wars after. The welfare state in itself is quite young. how have we gone to this point? And so for me, the media has a lot to do with it. The way in which, it's corporate vision making is a big part of, and so my resistance, I guess, is to explore, to interrogate all the way.
And do you think because I was just aware of the gaze in that film a lot of the time, and it was maybe feel uncomfortable or maybe feel nervous about the participants, especially when they're like vulnerable, at risk, etc., the way that people might perceive them. But because you lived there and you lived through that, and you were one of them in many ways, there seemed this empathy and this sensitivity in those moments, and I wondered how you negotiate those relationships in terms of the participants.
For example, with John, who has Parkinson's, I worked with him a lot over many years, and it was very delicate because he wanted to have known his struggle. So we really worked and said, we have to prevent other people from going through it. He's amazing. He wants nobody else to have. And the thing is that a lot of the kind of help and support networks that exist are not necessarily speaking the language that he would feel comfortable with. And that's a kind of maybe a class thing, which in England is quite pronounced still, in terms of the utterances of speaking. So he felt very excluded from some of these organizations. And I wanted to just show with him, we together wanted to show what actually happens when you go through this alone. And the same with the other people. So it wasn't just me saying, I want to, it was actually out of a lot of talking, what can we do? And so the other John, with a long talk on social services, for example, I had called social services many times beforehand, so had various different departments. And I wanted to just show with Jeff, a human being came. He was so frustrated, but a human being was there. He could say something. Then the cuts came even further. Now they're even further. No human being comes anymore. You have to do it over the phone. What if somebody doesn't have a phone? In very, very exceptional circumstances, even the ambulance crew demanded social services to come. They never came. And I'm not blaming a person here because they don't know, right? They just talk to somebody on the phone. It's a structural problem. So I wanted to show, with John together, I said, okay, I'm going to now do this phone call with you to see what happens, right? After how many times we've called, and that's what happened. So so these were really in discussion with everybody, and then I showed it to people and said, how do you feel about this? Would you like to do something else? Should we try with John in particular, with the Parkinson's? This is very, very sensitive and delicate and vulnerable. And he was very, very. He would talk to any journalist now about, please see the plight of people that go through this.
I think that speaks to I think we talked about before a little bit about the afterlife of these films. Both, I wonder if we could talk a bit about the film as an object and how it travels and how you distribute and how you see it being seen, but also your ongoing relationships with those places and also the people in those places, and how I know you feel strongly about this, and how it doesn't end when you stop filming, and how you can continue those relationships, or how those relationships do continue because you made a film together. How does that work without you just dropping it and then moving to something else? How does your continuing relationship? How do you negotiate that?
I mean, I think the film is just kind of peripheral to all the other stuff that we're doing in the area. I mean, I've just come from a 3-hour meeting with the barristers who are preparing the compulsory purchase order case for the Aylesbury leaseholders. So I mean, it's very much this is still a live issue. So in that sense, I think it's just one aspect of what goes on, and we made a conscious decision to make the film completely free and available online. You can download it, you can stream it, and so on. And we've actually found that by doing that, it actually increases the number of screenings that have taken place. In that sense, just by putting it out there, people have taken it up and have used it. And we have another 3 screenings coming up, and clearly there's an element in which it just takes a life of its own, but I think you can't really look at it apart from the other films that have been made about the Haygate and all the campaigns and so on, which have been which have absolutely made Haygate the most notorious regeneration scheme in London. And so also we've had this massive uprising in the past year in the housing struggles. So in that sense, the film has kind of ridden that wave. But we'll see what happens in 10-15 years' time. What sort of life it has.
Yeah. How did it feel for you watching yours back, not having watched them for 30 years or something?
Well, I had no idea what I was going to see, really. But it was kind of curious. I didn't realise Corbyn was in it quite so much. But certainly wasn't campaigning on his behalf in those days. But anyway, he filled a very useful function. Was very much a close collaborator in the campaign to stop that motorway, and was very articulate and helpful. My position as regards the community and the life of the film beyond the shooting and showing of it was, I lived there for 9 years, and in addition to making these 2 films and then a film for television, I also did sculptures in the area and a number of other actions that were all participating, and of course my friends were other people that lived on the street very largely, and so that continued. However, in a different vein, a film I made called Spirit of Albion, which is about so-called New Age travellers, Stonehenge and all of that, that was rather different, because unless I was a traveller myself, I was unlikely to sustain that kind of relationship with people that were living on the road. But I did give them some bloody good parties.
I wonder, because we talked a bit about how you let go, or do you let go, or how those relationships, because you had an experience even today, and I wondered how do you negotiate those relationships that seem so intense and so built around this project, and then what next?
I mean, I think for me it's because I lived there for before I started making this film, and I was very active on the committees, and I've residence committee, and always looked after people anyway, and our interests in some way try to fight for that. It just continues in that way. So today, I mean, we have such really good news, because we just found out that eviction got reversed, which we really fought for to get it reversed, and it looked very bad, and it was overturned, and I'm so happy today. I mean, literally I cried like an hour before I came here, and it was one of the people in the film. I'm so happy. So there's a lot of solidarity, I guess. Thanks. But there's a lot of incredible solidarity and care for each other, for the people who are in the film, but also for other neighbors. There are many people who are not in the film, but they supported it by making tea, biscuits. I mean, bringing jackets when it was really freezing on the people helped in all sorts of ways, and believed in the project in all sorts of ways, regardless of if they're on camera or not, and they're comfortable or not.
I think that speaks to this idea of often the criticism of these projects is about success and failure, and where that's located in terms of, did you win the campaign, did you save the estate, or whatever. But actually the successes can be in these moments where you collectivise for 2 hours, or you share tea together, or you have these relationships, or you are given a platform to have a voice for a change. And I think it's really important in these projects to recognise those small differences that occur, not just like the huge political shifts that happen.
The music, Olivia, so one song is a really old song, and Julia, whose father committed suicide on the estate. I cannot just say this thing because David just found this out, who's the co-producer, and the king came in 1936 to the estate to celebrate the new utopian vision of what social housing could be. And then, such a short period of time after, it became a slum. So I'm interested in these cycles too, right, and how crazy it is. But so Julia sang she sang that song, if it weren't for the houses in between. So it's like an old song, and it's copyrighted free, and all the people know it. And so we sang that as the end, as a goodbye to the estate. And the other songs, one is from another singer-songwriter, but she covered it, and then the other one she wrote. And she lived very close by the estate, and she was there over many years. We worked together, did much more, but only that ended up in the film. And she's an amazing singer. I think she's really beautiful. Olivia Cheney.